All right, hello and welcome to the first official episode of the Jack Calisthenics podcast. So we're here to demystify the ambiguousness of calisthenics training and kind of get rid of the whole bro science approach to calisthenics training. So I'm here with Refael Paz, and he's gonna tell us a bit about himself, tell him a bit about how to program for calisthenics. So Refael, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well, thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit more about calisthenics programming and all that, but why should calisthenics athletes sort of listen to what you have to say today, and what's your experience with calisthenics in general?
Okay, so I've been doing calisthenics for about 6 years now, and training dedicatedly for more than a decade. Why should people listen to me? I guess people resonate to the fact that I'm maybe not the most genetically gifted, youngest, lightest, best built, suited to the sport, but with a wise approach and perseverance, I got to where I am, and people maybe resonate with that, and they want to follow along and make it possible. I think that I speak to what I used to call it as the average Joe, and not to the elite of the most gifted athletes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. To be honest, yeah, I kind of feel similarly. I feel like a lot of the reasons why people sort of like my content as well, the Jack Vegan on YouTube, is because I'm not typically genetically gifted. I am built, but that's just because of, just like you said, a decade in training. Yeah, I think I'm almost coming up to a decade in training. And yeah, it's not that I'm genetically gifted. It's just I could just kind of put my head to the ground and just work hard and try and figure it out. And we're going to try and explain to the audience today kind of what we've both figured out about calisthenics programming. So let's hop right into that. So quickly, we're going to just talk about general kind of programming and principles. Then we're going to go into a bit more about the beginners, for like the specifics for beginners and intermediates and advanced athletes, because those are probably going to differ a tiny bit. But first, let's talk about, in general, the calisthenics programming. So in general, how should people train for calisthenics skills and strengths? And what's your general philosophy or method around training for calisthenics skills?
Okay, so calisthenics skills, most of them are strength-based. That's the limiting factor, which is strength, and not a certain. Yes, there's technical aspect to every exercise, and it's a spectrum, and you have exercises that are more skill-based and exercises that are more, or skills that are more strength-based. But generally, you should build strength, and through the basic patterns, mostly for beginners, and then you should, just pursue that as your main process, your main journey. And I think that just the terminology of calling an exercise like a skill, it reflects how people view training. Also, attempt. I am attempting planche. I am attempting handstand push-up. You're lacking strength, possibly. There's no attempt about it. It will not happen if you will magically just fall into a plank with the legs in the air. You either have sufficient strength or you don't. So you should, the base of your training should be devoted to building strength in the basic patterns, and then building that pyramid up. Okay.
So yeah, what I'm hearing is build that foundation and go from there. And almost everything is a strength game. It's not technically about doing attempts and doing this and that. It's about building the strength. And once you have the strength, you can do the skill. What are some general strength principles everyone can follow? So even if you're a beginner, even if you're advanced, intermediate, what's some general principles? So we started off with, okay, you need that foundation. and it's a strength gain. To do these skills or to do whichever move, it's going to require, some kind of strength. We're generally not talking about, endurance moves or anything like that. We're generally talking about strength skills. So what are some general strength principles that people can follow?
Okay. First of all, you should be specific with your training. Weightlifting is different from powerlifting, is different from calisthenics, and you will devote, hopefully, the time to acquiring the strength and the skills that are necessary for your own practice. And we talked about the foundation or the base, and obviously the base is different depending on your activity. It will be different for football, basketball, and calisthenics. So specificity is king, whether that's push-ups, handstands, and pull-ups, chin-ups, and so on. And once you have that, obviously you get better at what you do and what you do more of, and that is specificity. I think that people should gravitate towards overload. So usually seeking exercises that are hard, okay? Train for the difficult. There's a new phrase, train for the difficult. I think that what stands behind it is that it should not feel easy. And if it's hard, it's probably rewarding. And if we're talking more practically within training sessions, we are speaking more of the compound movements, or what I also refer as to the complex movements in calisthenics, because some calisthenic movements are technically single joint, so they're not compound, but they do have high neurological engagement due to their instability or complexity. So technically, a freestanding handstand push-up is the same pattern as a wall-assisted handstand push-up, but it's much more complex, thus engaging the central nerve system also, recruiting more muscle fibers and so on. So generally seeking lifting more and through compound and complex exercises, and not the isolation necessarily. Wherever you can usually lift more weight, it hints of the amount of muscle mass that is recruited, engaged in the movement, and that's generally a good thing, recruiting more muscle mass. So doing the basic compound movements. Besides that, I would say third will be the stress management. So, training hard, we talked about that, and then making sure that you are recovering. So you have some basic splits like, 1 day on, 1 day off, full body type of stuff. It makes sense because you train and then you follow that up with 1 full rest day. And for most people, it works well. So you have to manage stress. If you will train, every day, I'm talking about like fully stimulating workouts. Maybe it will work for beginners, but at a certain stage, you have to promote recovery. So I would say those 3 things are the biggest principles. It's the specificity, then it's the overload, and then comes the stress management.
Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. Yeah, those 3 strength principles, I also recently learned about them a couple months ago and implemented them into my training. Of course, just starting off with the simple ones, then trying to get more complex, because as you do add more, you want to kind of focus on a few, kind of master those, and then add the other ones to kind of optimize. But yeah, I completely agree. And that's what you've said here has kind of brought up a load of questions in my head. I think the first one is regarding the progressive overload strength principle. So I know in the calisthenics community or street workout community, a lot of people, really have high motivation to get skills. They're very passionate in this community. Like, I really want the planche. I really want full planche. That's why we train like literally 2, 3, 4 years, maybe more, to get some of these skills. So a lot of people want it so bad that they end up training very, very hard. almost ignoring that third principle you talked about, stress management. They don't manage their stress and focus on recovery. So what would you say is, how would you know that you're progressively overloading enough and not overdoing it?
Okay, so not overdoing it. You have some glaring symptoms, I would say, for overtraining, overdoing it. And I really generally believe that the body, it sends you enough hints, enough signals for you to pick up. And you have to be quite, neglecting to really found yourself at the point of sincerely overtraining. Okay, so it's not like it's an accumulative thing. It doesn't build up overnight. Okay, you have time, and the symptom usually for some people, depends on the person. It can be actually demotivating. So you don't want to train. You lack motivation. You don't have that zest in you, that spark. You know what I'm talking about. Anyone who trains know that some days you have it. So lacking the spark, that's one thing. That's maybe more neurologically. But physically, you will start feeling some maybe aches and pains building up in your joints. Usually that's where it happens. A lot of calisthenics exercises really come up to about joint integrity and joint health. So you'll feel the wrist and the elbows and the shoulders start speaking to you. And those are glaring symptoms. If you have that, you know that you should dial back training a little bit. And I would say that even beforehand, if you are not able to progress, you might, that is the outcome of possibly already doing too much because you're not recovering, thus not able to lift heavier or more reps or more duration in isometrical the next workout. Maybe you are not recovered. So day to day, I would say that you can use soreness as a guide. Soreness is not clear indication of strength. We know that already, but it can give you a good general indication of whether you are doing too much or not enough. If you're always sore, you have increased muscle tone, multiple muscle groups, most day of the week, you're probably on the doing too much side of things. If you are never sore, you're always fresh, maybe too fresh, you're probably erring on the side of not doing too much. So you can start, placing yourself on that scale to understand how is my stress management? How is my recovery? And possibly, eventually, if you'll be playing too much on that always sore, always achy side, the tendonitis, the pains will start building up. Those are the more glaring symptoms.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense about how not to push it too much. Because I think from what I've heard, I hear a lot of people mentioning about the forearm pain, the little injuries mounting up, and almost becoming worse till they can't train. That's what I hear more commonly than people saying, "Oh yeah, I'm not motivated." But that probably comes into it. There are a lot of times throughout your journey where you're not going to be motivated to train and you don't want to go to the gym, etc. But going back to when you were talking about the strength principles and progressive overload, you also mentioned compound movements. So movements that are using multiple muscle groups and training multiple muscle groups at the same time. You mentioned about lifting the heaviest weight and building muscle. So I'm focusing on the building muscle part. Do you prioritize building muscle when you're trying to target strength? Because I know a lot of people kind of, almost ignore building muscle. Like, I just want to get stronger. I don't want to get bigger. I only care about getting stronger. Like, do you think it's more beneficial to kind of build the muscle and you should focus on that periods? Yeah. What's your philosophy on building muscle when you want to get stronger?
So I believe that as strength athletes, hypertrophy, the addition of lean body tissue, muscle mass, should be mainly a byproduct of training your main movements. Okay, your push-ups, your dips, your chin-ups, your planches. So it's more of an outcome of training. But what you usually see is that if you take gymnasts, for example, if you study them, the strongest gymnasts are the most jacked amongst the different gymnasts. So you have different apparatuses. The most jacked gymnasts are always those that are on the rings, the strength-oriented gymnasts. And they are relatively to gymnasts, they are heavier, they have more muscle mass. And I believe that people still have that relative strength myth in their mind. Like, I don't want to get muscle bound. I will get too heavy. I will become weak. It will be harder for me to lift my own body weight. But then again, your muscle mass, the muscle mass that you added by practicing the chin-ups, the push-ups, the dips, it is only there as a response to your training. Therefore, it must be positive. Otherwise, it wouldn't have occurred. That's your body's way of responding to the stimulus. So it wants to, you want to pad yourself up towards your next event, your next competition, your next training session. I always think when I'm on the rings and doing hard stuff, I'm thinking about, I want like a shield. I want to be padded. I want to bring that and back. And all, I want to be padded, shielded towards the wall. And so to feel safe almost and bring as much muscle mass as I can to the table. So by practicing the movements, you will also build muscle, and building muscle is a positive mechanism. It's the primary actually mechanism of getting stronger. And so you should promote building muscle. And maybe if you were to look the other way around and try to reverse engineer it too much, that's where the message gets misled. So I will get the bicep bigger so I can chin up more. But most people problems are you're not chinning up, you're not doing enough chin-ups. Maybe get, bigger by actually doing the main compound movements. So maybe reverse engineering doesn't work. And that's where people maybe make the mistake.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think you've said a lot there that I completely agree with, especially about the gymnasts. This is what I really say on my channel, is that the building muscle part is a portion of the equation that is strength. It does go into it. You can, not focus on it, and you'll just gain it as a byproduct, as you said, but it is still a component of it. So if you do increase it, you are likely to increase strength also. But that is dependent on how you're training. If you're training in the rep ranges and with the specificity for the movements you want to get better at, then, well, you probably will and likely get stronger and bigger. But, and I've seen a lot of people that, maybe they're trying to build their base, but they're saying that they want to focus only on handstand push-ups, and getting to, 15 reps before they train planche, which I can kind of see where they're coming from in terms of want to build the foundation in the shoulders. But at the same time, I kind of tell them, oh, well, there are other aspects of the skill that are specific to the skill. For example, the wrist mobility, tendon strength, which you're not specifically the straight arm strength, you're not specifically targeting by just doing the handstand push-ups. So you will need to build those bases as well if you do want planche. So I do agree with that, and kind of focusing in on specificity as well as building muscle, which is not a downside. Being padded, being armored, Yeah, that's something I like as well. And you're gonna look aesthetic as well, which is a huge benefit to training calisthenics.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take it back to the programming as well. So I was going to ask you, how does someone know they're overtraining? We already talked about that. So let's flip it on its head and say, okay, how do you know when you're recovered? So in terms of stress management, fatigue management, how do you know when, okay, like it's time to get back to training now? I'm pretty much recovered. Like, do you need to be fully recovered, or how do you know? How can you really feel it? How can you tell? Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I would say for most people, the most practical recommendation is to actually follow already a proven program. So you have some common training splits, and you have some general recommendations on how many training days, how much volume to do per exercise, and start with, yes, something that is quite generic, maybe a template you picked up, and then try that and see how your body responds, because I feel that a lot of people really try to, make it their own way, but you have to almost learn it by others before you make it your own. So I would say that, go the other way around. Start a program that is already proven and there's a lot of knowledge out there, and test it. And if you make progress, if you continuously make progress, you are recovered. Don't worry about it. If you weren't recovered, you wouldn't be able to do more reps or more weight, or just progressively overload. And as long as you're making progress, don't change it. So don't think about it. Also, it's not, being recovered or what's the optimal volume, what's the optimal intensity. It's not like a single exact number that will be true for you. We know that it is individual, but more than that, it will fluctuate depending on the exercise that you were doing and also other stress factors from your life. So there's no number. You can't really grasp yourself around a specific number. It fluctuates all the time. So you should train, pick up a program, see if you make progress, and don't overthink it.
Okay, that sounds simple enough. I don't think I have any more to say there. Okay, yeah, I completely agree. In my experience, it's been starting off with the classic 3 times a week. This was generally when I was doing just more weights. And then when I went to calisthenics, I did the same thing. I threw in a few more exercises during my weight training days. And then slowly I progressed to just strictly doing calisthenics as I had that base. Started with just 3 days a week. I could recover from that and made good progress. When the stimulus wasn't enough from the 3 days a week, then I increased it. So it was more about going off my progress and, of course, like the other stresses. So so am I? How much sleep am I getting? Am I fully recovered for the next session and can progressively overload and push harder for the next sort of cycle of training? Can I keep pushing harder over the long term? And if I am, I kind of keep it as it is. I'm making good progress. And once I feel like I need a bit more in there, then I start adding either the more sets, the more volume, or maybe the extra day, depending on what it is. So I think intuitive training, writing stuff down. So, okay, what am I starting at? Okay, maybe I'm going to start with 3 days, this many sets for this exercise. I'm going to hit this many days, and then track it. As soon as you feel like you can kind of go to the next level, you don't want to hit a plateau, keep progressive overloading, then I kind of switched it. In terms of my experience, what I've seen work for other people, that seems to be generally like a good place to start, and tracking as well. I don't think a lot of people I know, like they write down, okay, I did this hold for this long, for this many sets. Yeah, well, what's your opinion on like writing stuff down in a journal, or like how do you do it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So before answering that, so you were actually training very similar to the recommendation I just gave. How did you came up with 3 days a week? You probably searched it up, right? You seeked some information online. You came up with the 3 days a week, and once you made progress, you stuck to the routine. And only when you had to really start tinkering and playing around, you thought about adding a training day or switching or doing more exercises. So you have to start with something that is, or you should, with something that is proven, and then make it your own and spice it up. Regarding the tracking training log, which I also spoke about and I promote generally, most people, they don't do it because they don't have to. That's the fact. So if you're making progress, and when I started, I didn't objectively measure everything because it worked anyway. Okay, I was training quite sporadically, and I was able to make progress from 10 push-ups to 12 push-ups. So it's fine. You don't track it. It's sort of a minimalist approach, and I can respect that. You're not doing something that you value as unnecessary at this point in time. But there comes a point that in order to really answer the question of what do I need to change, what do I do different about my training to really aggravate the response from the body, you have to know what you're already doing. Okay, so it's like a game of ping pong. You have to answer the question. If you don't know what you're doing, how do you know what to change? You don't know where to begin. So there comes a point in a practitioner's level of advancement that he will have to be, or she, more dialed down with their training, having a routine, following a routine that is structured and knowing exactly what you're doing. And then it feeds itself. Okay, then you know how many sets and repetitions, how many chin-ups you did previous workout. So now you know the number that you want to exceed. Today I'm supposed to do 11 chin-ups. It's 1 rep more than the previous one. Then you have that boost of motivation because you have that competition within your head. And then it feeds itself. You're more prepared towards the workout, you perform, you improve, and then you log it down, and it feeds itself. But most people, they don't do it because probably they don't have to. And maybe once you start making progress, you might want to start logging your training to have some more answers.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Following on from that, I think you're completely right with, because I didn't track. I don't think I was tracking my gym workouts just because I was tracking gym workouts. But in terms of skills, I didn't know really, I wasn't tracking I'm doing this many of my tucks, this many of my, for example, leg raises, because I was trying to get my core stronger for calisthenics, because you need a lot of core strength for a lot of the skills. So I was just kind of, okay, let me do some leg raises at the end of the workout to get stronger. So yeah, I completely agree with that. It's probably at the beginning, you're not really going to have to track. The thing I see with a lot of people now is that they almost continue that though. So into their intermediate stages or into their plateaus, they still don't know how much they're doing, or even they don't have a general plan, even something they followed. Some people just started training, going to the gym, do what they feel that day, and then leave. So I've asked people, okay, they're having issues, they'll message and I'll be like, okay, what's your current plan? They don't have one. How many, or what's your hold? They'll be like, oh, I'm not sure, but here's a clip. So they roundabout know, but they only really have clips on their phone. So this is where I'd say that I always recommend starting to write stuff down earlier. You don't need to, but I'd say the earlier you get into a habit of just, okay, let me record this set, let me write this down, it's going to come in handy once you start slowing down progress, because in my experience, progress will slow down. There's probably those few people where, it doesn't really slow down. Either they're getting that right amount of recovery, or genetically they just get the correct amount of stimulus to recovery ratio just right. But for the majority of us, it's going to slow down. We're going to make progress slow down, and then have to tweak some things. Maybe we start making progress from there. So yeah, that's in terms of myself and logging. Yeah, I'm fully for it.
Yeah, there may be regarding those practitioners that you talk to. Maybe they are approaching it in the Western way of training, which is I will smash I will smash the planche today, or if it's bodybuilding oriented, it will be muscle groups and not movement pattern. I will smash my chest today. And, what's the goal of the day? How many sets, reps? I don't know. Smash my chest. That's the goal. And they're relying on the fact that they will train enough. And then by the time they train again, that same movement pattern or muscle group, they will be recovered. So that's their way of approaching things. Whereas some programs more rely on, if it's higher frequency, for example, you have to start navigating between the sessions because it's not smashing is not your general approach. It must be much more carefully managed. And it will work for some athletes, that high intensity, every workout is a full-blown workout, and but for some it won't, and you can see it. And each one responds differently. You have the high-intensity guys, you have the consistency guys, as I call them. Those who are not, they are not the fully aggravated, dominant personas. They are just showing up, doing a certain amount of work, but coming back. They are showing up each and every time. And they are maybe more of the, I would say the detailed-oriented folks. And you have the high-intensity guys, and different approaches.
Yeah, I'd probably put myself in the detail category of just spending like trying to break it down, trying to look at all the details. How should my hands be? All the little specifics. That's probably me. But following on from that, let's move on to the next question because we got so many questions as well that I'm sure people want to know the answer to. So this is going to be a very general question because this is one I get asked a lot, and it's how long should you hold a skill to progress at it? So people say, okay, I want to learn, let's say I want to get better at my front lever. How long should I be holding it? Should I just go to failure? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so there is use in different duration holds. Okay, there you can use 3 second, very short, very intense holds. Maybe practice the more advanced position, and really intense hold. They feel different. Holding something very, very difficult, you brace everything. It's different technique. But then again, you have the longer isometric holds, which also have great use. And maybe they can, flush some more blood, and you can focus more on the technique and the awareness of body position. So I would say that there is good use in different isometric durations, and you should probably be quite comfortable at a certain body weight progression before moving on. So don't always play in that high intensity zone and try to break through that. Build up to a comfortable level. If we're talking about, let's say, a straddle planche or an advanced stack planche, build up to a level where you're fairly strong in it before you're moving on. You don't have a lot to expect if you're not solid at, this relatively easier position. And usually I would say, each progression takes a lot of time. It will differ between, depending on your weight, height, and background, and so on. But every position takes a lot of time for the body to get fully acclimated to, and the joints to get stronger at. And it totally makes sense, because when you think about it, for example, if you're holding a tuck planche, So the angle of your wrist to your forearm is not as narrow as it would be in a straddle planche. So the wrists get gradually acclimated. You need to give it time. And I remember that I liked practicing that 10-second isometric hold duration. It was the sweet spot for me at that stage. When I started calisthenics, it was long enough, but also intense enough. And I simply built to 5 sets of 10, 12-second straddle planche. And then I could already perform the full planche. There were no attempts about it. My body was prepared. I was strong enough. It was no testing. So use different isometric duration holds, but you should feel very comfortable and strong and stable before ultimately moving on.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot, because when I started, and I think a lot of people may fall into this, when I started calisthenics, I don't have a lot of equipment or knowledge. Those two things I didn't have at the start of training calisthenics. So I kind of ended up doing a bit too much, trying to attempt, I really want to try this skill, just doing attempts. I don't have resistance bands, and this is why I love resistance bands now, is because I can actively train the skill I want. Maybe it's the next progression or the next hardest one that I want to work towards, but I can actively train in different hold time ranges. So I can do that 5-second range, 3 seconds, very short, high intensity, even just with a band, if I've programmed it like that. Or I can go to, okay, I've already got this skill, let me strengthen it. Let me go to the 10, 15 seconds and hold it there with a band. But at the start, a lot of people don't have bands. So I feel like working with the progressions, you have to be slightly more smart about it to make sure, your wrists are conditioned, because you have to manage the full load, and doing these skills without a band and with a band, they feel slightly different. But depending on how you put the band as well, it can be quite similar. But if you put the band in slightly different areas or parallettes in the slightly wrong place as well, it can kind of throw off your balance, etc. But training in the different rep ranges and getting benefits from training in the different hold time ranges or rep ranges. So whether it's a dynamic skill and you're working towards handstand push-ups, and you want to do pike push-ups for higher reps, literally how I got handstand push-ups was higher reps of the elevated pike push-ups, and then essentially getting the handstand push-up for free. Similar to how you, straddle planche, 5 sets of 10 seconds, you essentially can full planche. I think that's the method that is really going to push people forward, is kind of work on the base. So that higher level of that pyramid, that next skill, it almost unlocks itself without really the need for spamming attempts.
True. And also, I believe that different people respond differently to training. So you have people who enjoy more of volume. They are volume freak. Usually volume freaks have a lot of muscle mass as well. They're slightly slower twitch, so they respond better to volume, and they naturally gravitate towards volume for that reason. So they like pump work and maybe longer isometric holds, or maybe sets of 10 tuck planche push-ups. That speaks to them. They get pumped, they get the arousal, and the high intensity guy, he gets the arousal from doing heavier stuff. So maybe ramping up and then building up to 1, 2, 3 heavy attempts, not spamming it too much, but ramping up and hitting that very high intense set. That's what gets him out of the bed. That's his arousal. So we have that general principles that we discussed about. You should play. There's good use in different isometric duration holds, and you should find like what you naturally gravitate towards, and that's where you really start becoming the more advanced or mature practitioner, as they call it, when you understand what works for you.
100%. And when you said about the kind of the volume freak and the high intensity kind of practitioner, yeah, two people came to mind. Shout out to you guys, the Barkage and Elias Page. Elias Page, he kind of, loves the heavy bands and, being able to do, the hardest skill. And he's being able to unlock very, very, very advanced skills, training that way, doing the high volume sets, warming up for a long, long time, and then doing bands. And then over the weeks, he unlocks very hard skills. But, the Barkage, for him, the high intensity, doing the attempts, so not to say attempts don't work really, if you want to call it attempts, but basically high intensity training is what he basically does, and is able to unlock skills just really by trying it and able to hold. And obviously he has a very good base, so he's not attempting skills that are way out of his reach, but he's doing the high intensity and just loves that, and it's worked really well for him. So two, polar opposites, but they both reached the same level, and it's because they're different ways of training that work for different people. So yeah, I completely agree. But yeah, shout out to you guys.
Beautiful example, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that would be good to bring up, because literally, as you said that, I had those two people on my mind. I was like, oh my God, that's them. But, to move on to talking specifically more about beginners, because we've already been talking about for a while. So let's talk a bit more about the specifics for beginners, intermediates, and advanced athletes. And then we'll call it there. So for absolute beginners, so let's say they're, can barely really do push-ups. They're kind of struggling with their push-ups, dips, not yet. Maybe they're working on negatives and want to get more dips. Maybe they're trying to work up to 5 dips, etc. How should they be focusing on their training, and what exercises should they be focusing on to really progress in the long term with calisthenics? How would you kind of say to them, okay, this is your path to success?
For beginners?
Absolute beginners, yeah. Just trying to work on push-ups and dips and pull-ups.
Okay, so I would recommend for beginners, if you're starting from scratch, to usually find what works for you. I mean that by that, what helps you build the habit, because a lot of beginners, they see already the coaches, the more advanced, they're more built, and they want to be there. And I would say your best way of getting there is focusing on how can you build the habit so you can sustain it. So focus on building the habit and almost disregard exercises, reps, and sets. Okay, build the habit. If your thing is doing, before breakfast, lunch, and dinner, a set of leg raises and push-ups, so do that. I don't mind really. If your thing is doing like 2 long sessions, build the habit. Okay, it takes a few weeks. Build the habit. Focus on that. Now, once you build the habit of training, from that's beginners from scratch. I would say that you should always focus on keeping things as simple as possible. You don't want to actually complicate stuff. You should save your heavy guns for later when things get more complicated. And so if you want to improve in the dips, just do dips. If you want to improve in the chin-ups, do chin-ups. Don't overcomplicate it. That's the specificity that we discussed about. And I would say that's what you should focus on, and keep it simple, and it will work. You're a beginner; it should work.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm hearing is not really nailing down rep sets, times a week. It's more about the habit and the consistency around training, and just recovering, because you're a beginner. You're going to make progress as long as you somewhat push yourself, you somewhat learn the technique for the skills correctly, and take it slow, don't get injured. You're going to make progress. Uh, I think that pretty much that pretty much covers
Yeah.
a lot about what beginners should focus on. Are there any specific exercises that absolute beginners, so they can't do much, maybe they're working on push-ups and dips, are there exercises they should focus on, or generally everything, kind of a bit of core, a bit of back?
Squats, chin-ups, rows, push-ups, and you can focus on building the handstand, which will also give you a lot of overhead strength. But either way, push-up and overhead pressing or handstand. And you should do squats, or if you have access to deadlifts as well. That's not calisthenics per se. Squats can be completely, stimulated by your own body weight. You can do shrimp squat, pistol squat, very, very advanced exercises. And push-ups, rows, and chin-ups. So you want to, engage full body, all muscle groups, vertical and horizontal push and pull. And then you have lower body knee dominant and lower body hip dominant movements. And that comes up to 6 exercises. That's your base.
Perfect. So I think that would be a good place for beginners to start. And quickly, because you mentioned legs, what's your opinion on calisthenics athletes and either not training legs or, what's your opinion on general leg training for calisthenics athletes?
I do not blame calisthenics athletes for, not focusing on legs. It's not as needed for success in the sport. We do use the legs, obviously, but you have to, on average, get the legs much more mobile than other strength athletes, I would say. So there's a lot of work with that. I started quite stiff, so I had 4 years to focus on mobility to just be decent. And that's a lot of leg work for anyone who was stiff. I can tell you that. I couldn't, add too much strength pieces to my leg training because I was so sore from Jefferson curls and pancakes, and my hamstrings were cracked all day long. So I can blame them. Ultimately, you mold yourself depending on the skills, and the skills are less. They are more upper body dominant. That's fact. But I would say that the way I view it, I practice calisthenics because I, not for the gimmick or for the dogma of it. I view calisthenics as a phenomenal way to build my body. And if I see another tool, another way to benefit from, I will use it. So I don't care, the name it has, whether it's barbell or dumbbell or pull-up bar or rings. I will use it. And that's where, leg training for me comes. I can do some squats, I can do deadlifts, I can do Olympic lifting. And I would say that if you view, which is generally a healthy way to view training, as you're not professional athlete. You're not, your career is not, getting paid by the performance. So maybe if you were a completely professional athlete, I will get that, standpoint. But we train for life, to generally be healthy, to enjoy our body, and neglecting half of the body, the stronger half actually, and the more athletic half of our body, doesn't make sense. So I would recommend to at least train once a week. Once a week, have a dedicated leg session. It's fine. You can focus more on the upper body and not neglect leg training altogether. Do some squats. You can do some Nordic curls for the hamstring. And you can do some explosive jumps, vertical jumps, bound jumps for more explosiveness, sprints. There are phenomenal way with just body weight to train your leg training. And it's fine that you're not focused on it, but neglecting it altogether doesn't make that much sense for me from a lifespan, quality of life standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. I have pretty much the same opinion. For me, the main thing is I feel like you do use components of your legs, obviously, in a lot of these compound movements. The handstand, what are you doing in the lower body? You're keeping tension there. You're not leaving the legs loose. There's tension there. Although it's not very, high intensity strength, you do need some mind muscle connection to that body part. And generally doing, the squats, even if it's pistol squats or weight squats, whatever it is, having that mind muscle connections to what your quads are doing, building the strength in the glutes. That's a lot of guys, that when they come to learning the straddle planche, they're weak in the glutes because especially straddling and trying to activate your glutes, it's quite hard. Us as guys, we're not usually doing, booty workouts and all the glute kickbacks. So the glutes, really it feels weird. You can't really feel the activation of glutes. This is what, powerlifters even have this kind of issue with activation of glutes in the squat properly. So in my opinion, the earlier you kind of get used to activating these parts of your body, not necessarily, building up a massive squat if that isn't your goal, but just, keeping it functional and keeping the mind muscle connection there. So when you need it for some of these full body movements, because in the front lever, I'm squeezing my glutes as hard as I can to keep my hips up. Personally, I'm squeezing my core and my glutes to really give me that lift. And, if I never trained legs, I think I would have found that a lot harder. And especially when it comes to learning skills straddled, like the straddle planche, and even in the handstand, squeezing the quads. So, yeah, I agree with you there.
Like you said, keeping it functional. I like it. Keeping it functional.
Yeah, that's my philosophy on it. Maybe not, super heavy, but keep it functional, keep the mind muscle connection, at least be able to flex your glutes now and again.
Yeah.
But moving on to intermediates. So generally for intermediates, so for beginners, just generally build the habit, keep consistent, don't get injured, learn the movement pattern. And you mentioned all those you said horizontal pushing and horizontal pulling, like the rows, and the vertical pushing, like the military press or whatever it is, handstands. But for intermediates, let's say that they've got, the fundamentals. They've got their push-ups, they've got their pull-ups, at least a couple reps, maybe not loads, but they've got it. And they want to start progressing towards the static skills, or even maybe some of the harder dynamic skills. How would you suggest they go about doing that? What would be the method there?
Okay, so whenever you say beginners, intermediate, advanced, elites, however you want to phrase it, I think about what really differentiates between those different levels of advancement and what is maybe the most common problem in each level of advancement. And as we discussed in beginners, it's actually training enough and building the habit. When it comes to intermediate, I feel that that's the stage where you should have a routine and know, what workout to follow and when. And that's where dialing the information down becomes much more crucial. And I would say that for intermediates, you should have a routine where you practice, let's say, twice a week each movement pattern. And because generally speaking, if you were practicing as a beginner, 5 days a week doing full body, it's fine. But now, as an intermediate, you are stronger, thus you are able to afflict more damage through training. You need more recovery time. So the intermediate, they need to spread the efforts. So from planche to the next time that you will planche, or from one arm chin-ups to the next time that you will one arm chin-up. It's not 5 days full body workouts anymore. That's where you should, be much more aware of each effort. And so following a wise training split, and that's a good recommendation I would give to intermediates, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're talking generalities here, because obviously this is just going to be general advice, because we don't know people's specific goals. Maybe some people have a sport on the side they're doing, or maybe some people have a very hectic day job where they're already lifting, they're doing labor work. So obviously we're speaking in generalities here. But yeah, what I'm hearing is start building together that routine, learning how your body specifically works, carry on the progressive overload, and you may need to change your training split to something maybe slightly more intense or more volume, depending on what it is. If you were doing full body before, you might have to split. But yeah, I think that's great advice for beginners. And I was going to also ask you the common issue you see with intermediates, but it sounds like you already mentioned that as well. Is there any other advice you sort of give to intermediates? In general, is there anything different with the exercise selection or something?
Yeah. For intermediates, I would say, so as an intermediate, each workout will be harder, each effort will be more intense, your work capacity is bigger, so maybe what was your full workout as a beginner now is only your warm-up. You warm up with a few sets of push-ups and rows, and so each workout is longer, more intense, thus the recovery time between similar effort should be longer. You should spread the sessions of the same kind more apart, and that's for the intermediate. It is always a wise idea to focus on basics. I always practice basics, even as what I can say is a more advanced practitioner as I am. There is always place for the basics. It's just, how do you structure them? Maybe for the beginner, that's the full realm of the workout. And for me, that's more complementary of the skills. As an intermediate, you should focus on mostly what I call the A-level skills. So in gymnastics, you have the code of points. It's the book where you actually get value depending on the difficulty. And the A-level skill, that's the base for a gymnast. And we took some skills from calisthenics and we took some skill from gymnastics. You have the press to handstand, freestanding handstand push-up, one-arm chin-up, which is not originally in the code of points, but I took it from calisthenics. One-arm chin-up, you have the back lever, straddle planche, full front lever. So that's a wide base of skills that are still relatively general. They will have carryover to a lot of different activities and exercises, and highly, highly beneficial to work on. So that's a solid, that's where the, let's say, straight arm, bent arm splits came from. You have the one arm chin up, handstand push up, and you have the planche front lever. So that's the basic skills that intermediate should focus on. And that will take a few years, a few good years. And and just grind, chip away one day at a time, one workout at a time, 1 week at a time. And that's what intermediate should focus on. And I would say, you can compete with your strength. Anyone will feel stronger. Maybe one arm chin up is your thing. You're a pull guy, and planche will be difficult, but always devote some resources to, all the elements at this stage, at least on the A-level skill. don't start specializing too much. I only do that. No, keep it general, keep it wide. That's the base. It's the most rewarding skills as well. Focus on them and work on your weaknesses as well.
More that you would want to start playing around with that you know of?
It's the same. It's always the same, base of strength training principles that you will play with. It's more of, what's the recipe at your stage, what you should focus more on. And for example, I feel that as you become more advanced, you should almost put more attention in your recovery. Like, okay, if you're already at this stage, you probably train hard enough. You need to focus more on your, where you have still more margin of improvement. So even coming back to our weaknesses as more advanced practitioner, you are more aware of your weaknesses. You have glaring holes in your game. Triceps, biceps, I don't know. You're weak in pulling relatively to pushing. And that will ultimately give you a hard time progressing through that. That's the notion behind building the base to begin with. Building the base is not, because nowadays it's very common to say build the foundation. It's almost like, this phrase gets, it is out there already, but the idea is that you can build the other harder variations on top of that harder skill. Like you wouldn't know really by the time that you will want to train the Maltese, maybe that your bicep is a weakness. If you worked on the general A-level skills, you will be ready, you will be prepared to more advanced stuff. And it really, in calisthenics, it's difficult because we always change exercises as a means of progressing from planche to Maltese. And so it's really difficult to know what you should focus on. But more for the intermediates, it's the same strength principles. I think that intermediates, like I said, they have more work capacity, they are stronger, they are able to inflict more damage. They should focus on really straining each session, training hard, but also then you need to spread your efforts. So maybe doing the same stuff 4 times a week, it will not work for the intermediate at this stage. So that's maybe the time that for a beginner, you wouldn't really worry about recovering too much. Okay, not at this stage. Now as an intermediate, you have to bring that more into the table. Train hard, but also then recover. So it's the focus, but it's the same strength principles. And actually, when you really dial it down, we always end up, regardless of the sport, with the same core principles that are true.
Yeah. And just on that point about beginners, intermediates, and the recovery, a lot of people don't know, but like when you're a beginner, everything's new. Everything's a new stimulus. So really, you don't need to do much to progress. And because of that as well, you'll get tired quickly, doing your sets of push-ups as a beginner. When you first started out with push-ups, that struggle doing planks when you started or whatever, sit-ups, you're going to get tired quickly. And just that is enough. And you can recover fast enough as a beginner. So you can actually do quite a lot in a week, which is why a lot of the full body workouts kind of work a lot very well for beginners. But then as you progress to the intermediates and things are getting a little bit more complex and a bit more in terms of intensity, and you're working with harder compound movements or because of the progressive overload, you're weighting it. You're doing the weighted squats and the weighted pull-ups now, potentially, if you're even at that stage, or just increasing the reps of pull-ups. Then the recovery, you're going to need a lot more, which is why I really like you kind of stressing that point about the recovery when you're getting to intermediate, because Yeah, I feel like with intermediate and advanced, the recovery becomes a lot of a bigger part of the puzzle of getting stronger when people think, oh, I need to do more, when sometimes it's I need to do more sleeping compared to the more training.
Yeah.
We're going on to the advanced athletes now. We'll finish off with that. So I think before you mentioned for advanced athletes, you mentioned something, but if there's any tips for the advanced athletes, I think it was about the basics. You said you're still an advanced practitioner, at least I think so, and I think in your opinion as well. I think you're quite advanced. I've seen you've worked on like the Maltese and some of the planche presses and some of these advanced ring skills as well. For advanced athletes, what are your general tips or things you think advanced athletes miss a lot of the time, which could help them improve that last, 5-10%?
Okay, so as you progress, again, you can always derive my recommendation from, it's the same reasoning behind what we discussed with the stress recovery adaptation process. As an advanced, you should really, you lower the frequency of the, let's say, hard ring stuff that you do. Most of my work at this stage is outside of the rings. So whenever I hit the rings, I'm fully prepared. It's infrequent. It's lower frequency at this stage. It's like competition. Okay, so I have a competition on the rings once a week. And then the rest of the week, it's to complement that. So I think about my mindset is, how can I improve towards the rings without actually doing the hard stuff, which are, the Maltese, the planche presses and so on. Those are the hardest to recover from. Okay, let's say on the elbows, on the shoulders, those are the heaviest to recover from. So you perform it low frequency now, once or twice a week actually. But that's not the full training regime. Throughout the week, I think about how can I prepare for that? What can I do to improve my planche at this stage? Whenever I hit the planche, it's high intensity, it's very hard, a lot of recovery time is needed. So I do all the other stuff. I do more of the accessories. I do more of the just joint conditioning. And that's where you bring more of the other stuff into the game. If we talked about beginners, just specificity, doing the compound movements, and then, as an intermediate, you do the A-level skills, it's still broad. Right now you have your few selected skills that you focus on, and then all the rest of the stuff, and they should complement and not take away. So when I do, let's say, okay, I isolate the biceps, triceps, and I do, I work my back to stabilize for the Maltese and so on. I don't think about, hitting my biceps one repetition, max weight. I think about saving my joints for the Maltese. So I will do higher repetition. Okay, I want to support the high intensity activity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that idea of given especially the joints that break. So you have them ready for the Maltese, because I know myself, I'm learning the iron cross and training for it at the moment. And the first thing to kind of really feel it is not really my muscles, although they are sometimes sore depending on what exercises I do, but really it's like the tendons, the elbow,
Yeah.
some of the shoulders. I know you know this because I've seen some of what you were doing for training for it as well. And it's good. You have that base in some of the muscles, but in the tendons still it's a lot. So I like the approach of having that competition with the rings. But my question might be for that is, I guess there's a balance there between the specificity and building the base. So, like, compared to doing the rings maybe 3 times a week and having accessories after you do the rings, because of that, the specificity, I guess you could argue, is more there because you're spending more time on the rings. What's your opinion on that, or why would you move towards 1 times a week on the rings and then the rest of the time preparing for it, compared to 3 times a week on the rings and some accessories after that, trying not to overdo it, of course? Which one, and why do you gravitate towards the 1 times a week, if that makes sense?
More of the results I see are reliant on my weakest links. So I'm highly limited by my weakest link, and if that will be, I don't know, if it will be the bicep tendon. Let's say you are working for the iron cross, it will usually, you will need to build up that tendon that is here, the bicep tendon, also just general bicep strength, distal bicep strength. That is your weakest link. So you will need to, doing high frequency iron cross stuff, you can only take your elbows, your bicep tendon it can only take so much toll before you will overtrain it, especially the joint stuff. So you lower the frequency with those type of sessions on the rings, but then again, there's a lot of other stuff that you can do towards the iron cross to build beyond the aspect of the bicep tendon. You can build the lats, you can build the chest towards that, do other exercises. And that's where I feel that you just have the weakest links that are more apparent, and those are the ones that are limiting you from actually performing better. Whereas beforehand, it was, everything was a weak link. So everything is weak. You have no glaring weaknesses. So you just bring more focus towards your weaknesses and less focus on the big compound stuff. That's where the lower frequency comes from. And also, I think about how can I put less mileage on my body? Okay, what is mileage on my body? So iron cross takes a toll for my body. How can I, change the variation? How can I improve towards the iron cross without training it specifically? Which muscle groups, which exercises do I strengthen to be able to keep performing the iron cross a decade from now, 2 decades from now, 3 decades from now? Okay, because I'm already 30 years old, and it's not, you think about the longevity in the sport much more, and just doing the actual iron cross, the actual skill, your wear and tear is much, much higher. So I think about, I lower the frequency with the iron cross, and I think about how can I improve towards it by the next time that I hit it. So I lower my mileage.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is, essentially you still want to indirectly train the skills. So the specificity is still there. And this will probably apply to some of the intermediate skills, is that when they're generally that kind of intense relatively for you, you don't want to risk overtraining it so much with the high frequency. If you are, of course, like you could do them with a band, but depending on how you're training it, those max effort attempts, you don't want to overdo it. So training it indirectly as well is another way to kind of, like you said, allow some areas like the tendons to recover while you're still training the muscle to maybe support the tendons, or you're slightly reducing the it's still maybe even doing some of the straight arm movements and still training your tendons and the muscles and the connective tissue around it, but just not so intensely. So I do like, I like that opinion as well. And the longevity, in it. Yeah, I completely agree. Um, I was gonna say like an analogy of when you're advanced, because when you said, oh, like my weaknesses is what I focus on. There's something I've said on my channel for ages. I mentioned in like many videos.
You said it. You said it beautifully, man. You said it beautifully, and it's actually, since you love it so much, you want to keep it this way. It's not I'm distancing from the rings because I don't like it. I hate it. No, it's actually to keep having that passion, to keep loving it. It comes from like you said, if like the bakery example, and the same thing in business and other things in life. Like you have a rest day, you have the weekend off, so you can actually enjoy the rest of the week following doing the stuff that you love. That break is not from the place of not wanting to do, or shouldn't be about not wanting to do something today. It should be, I will rest so I can really cherish it and value it once you come back. Yeah, so the Bodyweight Tribe, it's a huge library of calisthenics knowledge. You have calisthenics programs, tutorials, nutrition plans, everything that I really believe that a calisthenic athlete needs to succeed. And we have the community there. Everyone posts, their questions, their videos, their exercises. So you should definitely check that. And thank you.